The Charter Commission on August 16th, meeting tonight in person in the Great Hall and also on Zoom. This meeting is hybrid. It's being Zoomed as a webinar. It can be viewed live on your local PAC TV station. It's also being recorded. Any Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page on the town website. And any Zoom attendees, if they want to make public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. And for the in-person audience for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on a sign-in sheet. So the first item tonight will be the Pledge of Allegiance. So tonight's going to be a new order of business, which we will be discussing charters from around the Commonwealth, all types of charters. Each member of the commission has chosen 3 or 4 or 2 towns and study their charters. We're going to discuss them, and when we do that, I propose that as the commissioner is speaking, and he comes up with something that you think makes sense, let's comment on it, so that will show that we want to keep it in mind, put it on the table, and not forget it. It's an item that we may want to include when we start to assemble our own charter. We put the public comment at the beginning of tonight's meeting because the bulk of the meeting will be spent reviewing these other charters. Each person that wishes to speak will have 7 minutes. We have to be strict on that. That's the policy that this commission voted to accept, 7 minutes. And then when we finish the public comment, we will start the other business of the evening, which is the review of the town charters and city charters. So the first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to comment? And if you do, it would be nice to, if you've already spoken to some of you, I see familiar faces. If you've already said it, you don't need to say it again. We've noted it. And if you're speaking for the first time, welcome. Mr. Handlin is our first speaking in public comment.
I hope you don't mind if I take this off. I'll be the first one to tell you I am very hard of hearing. When people have masks on, I can hardly hear a thing.
Yeah, that's a good point, that with the masks, we need to speak slowly and distinctly so that everybody can hear it. Okay.
Ready to go?
Go ahead. Yep.
Let me just start my... my name is Michael Hanlon. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15. Thank you, Mr. Abbott, for allowing me to speak. I was not able to attend the public hearing on June 24th, but I did send in written comments, which you have. I'm here tonight to expand on those written comments. You are probably aware that I and many other citizen volunteers worked for 18 months to get 7,200 signatures on our petition. This effort, our effort, started several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when I was invited to attend a meeting to talk about our town government. That first meeting, there were 2 former selectmen and several town meeting members. Then there was another meeting a couple of months later. This second meeting was hosted by another former selectman and included 2 former selectmen, a planning board member, and several town meeting members. The most intriguing aspect of both these meetings was a statement by everyone present: the town meeting doesn't work. Town meeting needs to change. I mean, I was very impressed because these were all senior leaders of the community, all saying the same thing. It doesn't work. It needs to change. We need a charter commission. So why do I mention this at all? This effort started with 2 meetings with senior elected officials of this community that saw the problems with the current system and the need for change. The citizens of Plymouth want change as well. When I was collecting signatures, many people asked me, is this about a mayor? My answer was, no, this is not about a mayor. This is about having a conversation, a town-wide conversation about what we like about our government, about what we don't like, and what we think we could do better, how we think we could do better. No one on our committee had any preconceived notion about the right solution because we wanted the voters to decide. Let the voters decide what kind of government they want. After all, our federal Constitution says, we the people of the United States. The power given to all elected officials comes from the people, not from political parties, not from special interest groups, and certainly not from elected officials. As a commentator recently said on NPR, no elected official ever did anything to give up their power. Once they have it, they're going to keep it. No matter what you may think, the voters gave you a mandate for change. Whether you take advantage of that mandate is up to you. I am concerned that you will not take advantage of this opportunity for the very reason I mentioned early. No elected official ever gave up their power voluntarily. Of course, that's not strictly true. There are many enlightened and courageous individuals that would gladly give up their elected position for the good of the community. Are you one of those individuals? Or are you going to protect your own turf by failing to consider all the options available to you? I'm not looking for an answer to that question. But I am suggesting that you need to keep an open mind. And for the sake of the people that elected you, consider all of the alternatives, listen to the people, and make the right decision. I think there are many people, including some of you, that think any change in our current form of government is going to be bad for town employees, or is going to be bad for elected officials, or is going to be bad for committee members. If we were to change our form of government tomorrow to any other form, the people most impacted by that decision would be the select board and town meeting members. Most, if not all, other boards and committees would continue to function as usual because many of them are functions of state government, or state law, not state government, state law, not local law. So many of the roles and responsibilities that you and others have in town government will continue as before. In my experience, most people don't like change, and yet change is all around us. Most of the time, it is out of our control. But this kind of change is absolutely within our power to control. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We do not need to jump off a cliff into the unknown. We can understand the changes that we want to make simply by looking to the experience of others. Other communities have taken the necessary steps to change their government for the better. Ask them about what they did and why they did it. I challenge you to find one community in Massachusetts that once they made the change to a new, improved form of government, ever went back to the old form. When I spoke recently with a Braintree town clerk, a former selectman, by the way, about their change to a town council, he said emphatically it was the best thing they ever did in Braintree. In my opinion, this town government does not work and needs to be repaired. You have the power to do that. This effort, your effort, is not about the past. It's not even about the present. It's about the future of this community, a community that we all love and are proud to serve. You need to think about the future when you are thinking about the most effective and efficient form of government. We need a government for the 21st century, not rooted in the 17th century. The time for change is now, in my
Mr.
opinion,
Hanlon, 15 seconds.
and I hope that you will embrace it. I need 30 seconds. I got one paragraph to read. One last thing. You are required by Chapter 43B to have at least one public hearing at the beginning of the process. You had your one perfunctory public hearing on June 24th. If you're really serious about listening to the voters and you value their input, you need to go to them rather than making them come to you. I suggest that you have a public hearing in every precinct in Plymouth. And make sure that you get an invitation out well in advance, not in the OCM 24 hours before the meeting, like the last public hearing. Some on the commission may say that you do not have enough time, but I think they miss the point. The point is this. This is about what the voters want, not what you want. You have more than enough time to do this. You need to hear from the voters, and you will need to be proactive in order to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Larry?
We're talking about the will of the people. We're talking about the will of the people.
Yep.
Was there not an election for Charter Commission?
Yep.
And my understanding is that the Charter Commission is to use its wisdom in fashioning what it believes is in the best interest of the people of Plymouth, to submit it to the people, and to obviously allow the people to choose whether or not they agree. Is there a problem?
As long as you have an open mind, there's no
Well,
problem.
when you say open mind, my understanding is that although you said that mayor wasn't on the petition to seat a charter commission, and it wasn't, you want a mayor and a council. Am I wrong?
You are. Did I ever say to you or anybody else, I want a mayor?
Well, if we don't have a town meeting, which you seem to be adamant about, I'm not sure what the other alternative other than a council is.
Well, you will find out when you do your work tonight. There are multiple options besides a representative town meeting. There's town council, and there's multiple iterations there. There's strong mayor with a city council. There's a weak mayor with a city council, like Worcester. Barnstable has I thought they had a town council, but maybe that's been some time since I've been in Barnstable. But my point to you, Larry, is there are lots of options. I have no preconceived notion. I said that in my comments. Nobody had any preconceived notion about what the solution is.
Yeah, but you keep saying you have a preconceived notion that town meeting is not an acceptable option. Am I wrong?
You know, I watched a lot of your tapes, and one comment was, what are your facts versus your opinions? What I told you are my opinions. I have no facts. I have my opinions. I've been 6 years as a town meeting member, 6 years on the finance committee before that. I've watched this for 12 years in Plymouth. I've also experienced it in a lot of other communities, but I've been watching it in Plymouth for 12 years. I think it needs to be fixed significantly. And I don't think tweaking, the last charter review committee made a whole bunch of tweaks here and there, but there was no real significant change. It was just selectmen, select board.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Hanlon? Okay, thank you. Who else would like to speak for public comment?
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to sign in anywhere. My name's Peter Neville. I'm a town meeting member of precinct, what am I, precinct 10, precinct 13. I'm a little nervous, but I am. I don't have any preconceived notions about what shape this government should be. I think for 6 years I've been a town meeting member and have felt pretty much like I'm drinking out of a fire hose for every single one of those meetings. Thank God I've had confidence in the A&F committee and the people that Steve has appointed there. But I would ask this commission to seriously consider creating a standard of review for becoming a town meeting member. I don't know if it exists anyplace else, but I went online to see if there was any training available for town meeting members. I understand there's a handbook. I'm not aware of any forum wherein town meeting members would be asked to discuss, consider, bounce off of some of the guidelines in that handbook. But perhaps you would consider creating a standard of review for a town meeting member in Plymouth. It's just a variation on a theme. I think that my perception of town meeting membership is that it is predominantly comprised of people that work for the town or are related to people that work for the town. And if I was an employee of the town or related to someone that worked for the town, I would want to be a town meeting member because I would want to vote on issues that affect my livelihood or my family's livelihood. So there isn't, that's pretty much of a slam dunk. But I think that we could add perhaps another level of review other than my personal interest in protecting the welfare of my family. I'm in great support of this commission, and I supported the collection of signatures. And I hope that the folks that were elected don't have a preconceived notion that the current 135 members of the town meeting that we have is the only and the best way. That would be a terrible thing. So to Mr. Pfeiffer's question to Mike, I'll ask you whether or not you can answer that question and say, honestly, I don't have a preconceived notion that 135 people sitting in an auditorium and making decisions for $247 million on one warrant article is the right way to go, for the school. So that's me. Housekeeping, when I go online and I look at the website and I look for an attendance record for prior meetings, there's nothing, there are no minutes. There's no minutes of your July meetings. Now, I don't know who does that, but, I think that in lieu of going to the Plymouth Cinema at 7 o'clock, I think people are going to come here and watch and listen to a conversation that's very, very, very important. And thank God we got some bright people up there, some conversationalists, And maybe in public comment, there might be a dialogue. Maybe there'll be a question that comes up that creates a conversation. So I look forward to finding out who does the minutes and how they get posted to the website, and whether or not attendance is taken, and whether or not this commission has decided if you missed 2 consecutive meetings, then we're going to elect somebody else, or what the requirements are for continued participation, because the two folks that aren't here tonight, by the way, are you going to go through all of these tonight? Are you going to look at all these things tonight?
I don't know what you're looking at, Mr. Neville.
Is the agenda item 3,
Looking at the
6,
charter list? No, we're not going to
9,
go through.
12, 15, 18, 21,
We won't
24,
be going through 28 charters tonight.
26 different
Right.
charters you're going to look at tonight?
Nope.
Okay. So, does anyone, is there someone responsible for posting stuff? You do that.
Now, Mr. Neville, we have our minutes from every meeting. When they're approved, they are posted at the website.
Once they're approved, they're posted. So we just
Minutes
did
are right up
August
to
5th.
date. Tonight, we'll be looking at the minutes for the last meeting. Attendance is there in the minutes.
And
And
we'll-
by the way, one of our commissioners is present by Zoom tonight. So we have actually 8 out of 9 commissioners present.
Thank you.
Welcome. Other speakers for public comment? No question? Betsy?
Mr. Hanlon said that he has opinions but not facts. And you have opinions as well, of course, and so do I. But I try to back my opinions somewhat by facts. Have you done any research comparing the salaries of employees in Plymouth with the other towns on the South Shore? I mean, you are implying that the people in the town meeting are voting the really high salaries for themselves. Do you have any proof of that or any facts?
I hope that I did not imply that there was some qualitative benefit or salary benefit. I didn't know. I had no intention of suggesting that, Betsy.
Well, I'll review the tape, but you said something like if I were a town employee, I would run for town meeting so I could vote for myself or something like that.
Yeah, I would vote to make sure that my benefits continue, but my welfare.
Well, that's part of a person's salary, their benefits, right?
Certainly a person's salary.
Well, that's what we're talking about, is salary.
But I never made it a comparison to other cities and
Well,
towns.
that's right. So Plymouth teachers and town employees, would you do that research for us and tell us that they make much more money than, say, towns that have mayors and not town meetings?
I have no idea.
So then your assumption, and you're making an assumption that for which you have no facts. So
No,
thank
my
you.
assumption is that if I'm a town employee, I would want to have a vote to perpetuate whatever benefits are happening.
But do you have any proof that that's happening?
I think only by virtue of the number of employees that are town meeting members. It's not
I'm a
about-
former town employee and a town meeting member at the same time. I think that your assumption and even almost accusation is false, but also I think a number of people run for town meeting who are developers and real estate agents so they can vote on zoning. I mean,
Sure.
it's possible, right?
Sure, that would make sense.
So that also could happen with a city council. People could run for city council in order to perpetuate something. So I just wanted to try to get some facts out. Thanks so much.
I just like to say,
Ms. Spicer?
I'm sorry.
Just for your knowledge, back when I was town clerk, I was asked to quantify the number of town meeting members who were employees or spouses of employees. The answer was 17.
Out of 135.
17 out of 135. You know, and these are all, obviously, these are elected people. And it was the choice of each of the precincts to choose those people. But the inference that I took from what you said was that it was a much higher number. It's a pretty minuscule number to affect.
That's very
Tom-
clarifying, Larry, because I've been operating under misinformation. I thought it was greater than 50% of town meeting members were either employees of the town or had relatives working for the town. And you're saying it's 17, which is a much lower percentage.
Happily, I'm retired.
Yeah.
But the last time I did
That's good.
I did the quantification, the answer was 17.
Yeah, let me just add to that point. Several years ago, there was an effort to reduce the town meeting below what we now have to somewhere around 85. And in the course of that debate and discussion, the number of employees became relevant as a percentage of the town meeting as it was shrinking. And that's when we asked Mr. Pizer to give us the number of employees currently in town meeting. And it was actually a big surprise. But it's one of the things you have to keep in mind when you discuss reducing the size of town meeting if there's a cohort of employees already in the town meeting. Mr. Mann has a question.
No, I just wanted to say, I saw, relevant points on both sides here, that Mr. Neville suggesting a standard review, that caught my attention, and I think we all want to have as informed as possible town meeting representatives and committees and all, and if there's any way we can educate them on the process, rather than just throwing them into the mix and letting them learn after 20 years or something, I think that would be important. But I also understand Betsy's point as well, and I think it's kind of borne out in both the statistic that was just cited and in the fact that if you do review the relative salaries of our school teachers and other town employees, they don't rank high in overall compared to other communities. That's my understanding. That was the case, and in which case, regardless of how many are there, they're not doing a good job of protecting their of feathering their nest, so to speak. So I think there's, some information there that is relevant, but we should always keep aware of those things,
Are you aware that elected town meeting members cannot participate in the Massachusetts municipal training programs?
Elected town meeting members?
Cannot participate. So there are in-service trainings, Larry, you're certainly aware of this, for the Mass Municipal Associations. And they can take training on, what's a budget? What's a balance sheet? So they're,
Go ahead.
since like in-service training, and you, what is the role of a town manager? Bill?
Mr. Neville, your comments are interesting about the idea of education towards orientation, I guess it was, more for elected officials across the board, really, from school committee to planning board, right across the board. But also, I like that idea, and I hope that you elaborate on it over a period of time and provide your ideas, because that is definitely something that we should be incorporating, formalizing in our charter, whatever direction we go, that we have some responsibility as a municipality to provide orientation to newly elected officials. The same thing as the town should do, probably outreach to its residents to explain to them how this process works too. So I did find that interesting, and any attempts to elaborate on that would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neville. Any other comment for? Yes.
I'd just like to make a comment. In 1976, I went on the Finance Committee, and Mr. Canty will attest to the fact that there's no training there. In 1981, I became a selectman the first time. There was no training there. And I would also point out that I've looked through 2 mayoral charters, and I've looked through, what did I look through? Framingham and Weymouth. There's no requirement in those charters for training. So the fact that there is no training, it's pretty much across the board, and that's my only point.
I think, David, I was thinking more on orientation, that I think the town should do a better job educating its residents and people serving in different capacities about the scope of their responsibilities. In light of an election we just had with extremely low turnout, the town could do an extended effort of educating people on elections, and I think that there needs to be a rethink of how we reach out to the community, because it's obvious the newspapers are shrinking in their capacity and social media is developing. We have to start thinking of ways of communicating with residents about how to vote, when to vote, and if they serve in this capacity. I just think it's something that we might think of, because you're absolutely right, when you go to serve on these boards and committees, there's no training, but I think there might be an effort to look at possible formalizing language that would make the town required to provide some sort of orientation packet to people serving in different capacities and doing outreach to the residents about things that are happening around them. I think information is a very important aspect of what a municipality can be doing to reaching out to its residents.
Bill,
Trustee Hall?
I just want to follow up on that. When I became a town meeting member over 20 years ago, the caucuses were tremendously helpful in orienting me to the town meeting that was coming up, and all the other people in Precinct 12 answered all of my questions either within the caucus or by phone. So I think that caucuses probably are the place where these orientations might best take place. It certainly worked for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're still in public comment. Any further public comment tonight? Yes?
Good evening. My name is Gene Weiner. I live at 6 Picket Fence in Plymouth. I'm an ordinary citizen that has seen my taxes nearly double in the 11 and a half years
Sure.
since I've moved here.
Microphone on? I can't hear you.
Is that better? Green light's on? That's okay. Name's Gene Weiner, 6 Picket Fence, Plymouth. I've seen my taxes nearly double in the 11 and a half years since I've been here. For community support and activities, I've chosen rather to work with local clubs and societies and serve a term on the board of directors of the Phil rather than enter politics. It is no secret that our town has many problems ranging from lack of timely maintenance of public properties and roads, attracting sustainable commercial enterprises, improving our school systems. By the way, our facilities are ranked very high in the state. Our athletic performance is ranked very high in the states. The safety of our school is ranked very high in the states. Our education level of our high school is ranked in the lower half of the state, in spite of spending near the top amounts per student. And we have to provide better parking for downtown, especially not only for our residents, but for our tourists who provide much of the revenue upon which our town depends. Plymouth has a challenge of preserving its historic past, which brings the tourists, while modernizing the form of government to survive in the future. Our present form of government seems to be constantly facing unexpected problems and needs for funding. There are decisions which must be made without waiting for the next biannual town meeting. Our select board currently comprises 5 members, 2 of which are from the same precinct. How does this provide representation to the other 13 precincts? I watched Tuesday's disgraceful meeting of the select board. Not a single major issue facing the town was resolved or addressed. It was really the most boring thing and unsuccessful meeting I have ever witnessed in a public arena. There's no viable long-term plan in effect to prepare for the continued population growth and the added services that we will have to provide for it. There is no approval process to correct possible errors when taxes and fines are levied against citizens. I was witness to a case, just such a case this past week with one of our residents. There are many other items that are currently neglected or need to be addressed, some with little or no notice. The Commonwealth has recommended a change of the form of government from town meetings to something else when a town reaches a population of 30 to 40,000. This can be found by looking under the documents under the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It has been said that 6 or 7 of you have a preconceived notion as to what Plymouth's future government and charter should look like. It has also been stated that many of you intend to ensure that no substantial changes be made to Plymouth's charter. I hope and I want to believe that these statements are false, and I hope you are with me on that. I hope that each of you will address the challenge of reviewing our charter with an open mind. I hope that each of you will strive to identify and address those areas and articles that need to be modified, eliminated, or improved. I hope that each of you will find the courage to do the right thing for our town, for our citizens, and for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Any
Thank you very much
questions?
for your
I can't hear you through the...
comments.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Any other participants in public comment? Mr.
Before
Lynch.
Kevin speaks, could I just clarify something, Bill? Could I clarify something? I believe that Wrestling Brewster is at the Committee of Precinct Chairs meeting tonight. Someone mentioned that he wasn't here. I believe the Committee of Precinct Chairs is also meeting tonight. Is that
Betsy,
correct?
I don't understand what you're saying. Can you say it
Oh,
again?
sorry. I believe that Wrestling Brewster is absent tonight because the Committee of Precinct Chairs, are they meeting
I
tonight?
don't think
It's
so.
Thursdays.
Oh, they're not meeting. Oh,
Maybe
okay.
Thursdays.
Oh, okay, thank you.
But we knew he was going to be absent. He had some prior commitment. Okay, excuse me, Mr. Lynch, go ahead.
Okay, Kevin Lynch, Precinct 13. Hopefully, it's real quick. First, when citizens give you, the commission, documents, does that go onto the website? And no answer. Okay, see, that's tough because I took this from the bulletin board, and it says, let your voice be heard. If someone comes here, gives you a document, it's their voice. It's in the written word. Invites the public to attend the meetings in person. Now is the time to let the commission know your thoughts and ideas about how our town government operates. And that's what people are trying to do. And I appreciate Mr. Wiener's comments because he said he hopes that it is not the case that there are preconceived notions. But yet, unfortunately, some people are under that understanding. But here's what I'd like to do. Here's something creative, out-of-the-box thinking. I saw a movie, I used to show it to my students year after year when I was teaching physics. It was called Fat Man and Little Boy. It was a docudrama. Paul Newman was in it, John Cusack. Dwight Stone, fantastic. He was Oppenheimer. And he understood the concept of free discussion. The unfortunate part, I'm sitting here, and I've sat here a number of times, and I've seen people come here with their thoughts, and yet they're kind of beaten back by some of the very commissioners on here, challenging them, almost like suppressing them. And Dwight Stone, Oppenheimer, he was trying to gather these brilliant minds to make the nuclear bomb. And his adversary was Paul Newman, General Groves. And Groves was a regimented general, engineer, but regimented. And he didn't understand free discussion. And especially in the military, of course. So they were at a crossroads, and Oppenheimer kind of says, okay, let's go, free discussion. And Groves says, no free discussion. And Oppenheimer brought up, of course, it's a docudrama, he said, every one of those scientists in there, they are used to pinning their best ideas on the bulletin board and having people basically challenge them, trash them, and it would show that their ideas actually work. So with that in mind, I would love to have you folks do that very thing on the website and even here. And have you show how good that this town meeting form of government here in Plymouth is working. Let the people know. If you're proud of it, let them know. But please don't hide the bumps and the warts. Because there's a lot of people out there that are saying, I got a feeling, or they've seen enough, and Mr. Hanlon brought that up tonight. So I don't know how it's going to be done, how it could be done, but I think now you've got a dedicated website. Put the documents. I gave a document here the second meeting. It's not on there. And I've seen some other people say things. That's not on there. So I challenge you, and I like this. I like this tonight with Mr. Pizer and Mr. Hanlon. There was a healthy debate going on, almost like a free discussion. So people will see for themselves if change is needed. But personally speaking, as I said the second meeting, and I do not like that third rail of mayor at this time. I think it is just something that which is good. It's good for you to dig in and say, no, 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 no. Not a mayor, not a mayor. Okay, that's fine. But what about the people who are saying, hey, would you please show us why this is the best form of government, and could we change it for the better? And then let the people see on the website. And I'll probably guess if you put that information on there, because information is power. And why isn't it there? Are you keeping it to yourselves? And I really believe that the people will perhaps come out and have that healthy debate or have that free discussion. So I appreciate it. Anyone here, please? No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch.
I love that, Mr. Mann. Just put that out there. I
Yeah,
am
thank you.
not looking for 180-degree change.
Thank you. We're
Questions?
at a 24-month effort here, so there's many, many months ahead of us, and I think you're going to see some of the, once we've accumulated the information, then we will be putting out information, so perhaps you'll be able to check our website and hear what we have to say, because at the end of the day, we need to produce a charter.
May I suggest, sir, with all due respect,
So,
I gave the document on the second meeting. That really should be on the website as well as other people's.
Yeah, you made that
The
point, Mr.
citizens
Lynch,
that
we will check
came
that.
here, they're looking to have their voice, their thoughts and ideas about how the town government operates as you were soliciting them to do.
thanks. Any other comment for public comment? So we can now turn to the discussion of the evening. So several of us have reviewed charters. I would suggest that maybe each of us present one of our charters out there, and if you see comments or see things in the charter that we want to incorporate or keep in mind when we start assembling our own charter, let's speak up so we can make a note of it. Does anybody want to go first? I'll be happy just to kick off. I actually reviewed so far 3 charters: Arlington, Somerville, and Billerica, and I can report on Arlington quickly here, and then somebody else can go next. But the town of Arlington has a representative town meeting charter, has a population of 44,000, has 252 town meeting members, 21 precincts, 12 town meeting members from each of the 21 precincts. In 1970, they changed from an executive secretary like we had in Plymouth way back then, and they changed to a strong town manager form of government, very similar actually to Plymouth. And they have been functioning now for 50 some odd years. In the 2021 town meeting, the spring town meeting actually went 11 sessions. But what's interesting about Arlington, I'm just going to skim it very quickly, but there were some interesting things in here that I found fascinating and perhaps something we ought to look at when we start considering a charter of our own. First of all, a town meeting member in Arlington who speaks at town meeting, before he speaks, he must identify if he has any conflict. If he or his immediate family has any direct interest, he has to first disclose it at the beginning of his remarks, and the moderator reminds town meeting members of that. That's how they handle conflict of interest. It should also include if he's employed as a consultant or as a lawyer that somehow affects the matter in which he's speaking. The first time a town meeting member there speaks, it's for 7 minutes, just like our public comment. Second time is 5 minutes, and there is no third time. Town meeting members can speak twice. A third time would require the majority of the town meeting to approve it. They have a procedures committee, a town meeting procedures committee made up of the moderator, assistant moderator, and 3 town meeting members who reports and recommends on matters related to town meeting procedures and how it affects town meeting. And interesting, one of the other criteria is how it affects a person who might want to run for town meeting. So they're always thinking how town meeting is functioning, but to make it attractive for a possible candidate for town meeting. These were all, I thought, quite interesting ideas. They have a separate section called Appointment of Committees, which means every committee is formed under that section. The number of people, the appointing authority, how they're removed if they don't make the meetings, and so forth. It's all done within that one article in their charter. The motion to reconsider takes care of what I've always thought was a trap at town meeting. In other words, you need to make a motion to reconsider before the final adjournment of the meeting. But they have a rule that a motion to reconsider that you might be going to bring to the next session of that town meeting, you have to give notice of your intent the night the vote was taken that you're reconsidering, that you're going to make a motion to reconsider at the next session. And if any of you have seen how town meeting operates, that would prevent an ambush where somebody, for an important vote, we had it, I know, we had votes in the Pine Hills, where the vote went one way and it was done, but at the very next session, without any forewarning, a motion to reconsider was made. And it, that works a lot of unfairness to the folks on one side or the other. You may have experts that would have to have been there and present and so forth. So I think that's a very good rule. The couple of other features, the Finance Committee in Arlington may include town meeting members, but not employees. No town employees, but town meeting members can be included. They have an audit power and an executive secretary, and their appointments to town meeting are made by an appointing committee, not just the moderator, but a committee. And then there's a number of articles. You can see how the charter has kind of grown in the last 50 years. A number of separate articles, each devoted to a passionate item on someone's wish list. There are articles on cable television being run by the town, Department of Civil Defense, parking district expenditures, recycling, Consolidated Information Technology Department, which I think is something we really should be looking at in Plymouth, technology, information systems. They have a whole separate section on how that is functioning within the town of Arlington. And then they have added just a year ago in 2020 was a whole new article entitled Consideration of Envision Arlington Statements of Community Values. It's a very short article, but it says that the town meeting or the town goes through a process of enumerating community values, and it goes right into their charter and states that all town officials shall consider those values as adopted in establishing the respective policies and in performing the various public functions. So the town has gotten together, delineated what are their community values, then requires all officials and so forth to follow it. And I have to say this, reviewing a charter like Arlington and then reviewing a mayor charter like Somerville is absolutely, it was stunning. The difference between night and day. The community involvement, just going through the Arlington Charter, was tremendous. You look at the Somerville Charter, I wanted to review it because that's a progressive town, progressive city. I was always impressed with what's going on in Somerville. But there is no participation. The mayor appoints almost every single official in the city of Somerville. They have an 11-member council with 4 elected at large and 1 from each of 7 wards. And that's it. If you look at the page about what the mayor does, everybody in their government except the town clerk is appointed by the mayor. And there's even a provision that says if there's going to be an audit, these other town charters like Bill Ricker, Arlington, Plymouth, say that audit has to be performed by professionals, either accountants or a controller. What does it say in the Somerville Mayor Charter? Appointed by a, quote, suitable person, conducts the audit. That's right, that's the quote in the charter, "A suitable person will do the audit." Anyways, finishing up the Arlington, they have another section on construction projects that deals with the women in the workforce, participation, equal opportunity goals. They provide for purchase of fuel-efficient vehicles. They decided to put all these progressive notions right into their charter to express the values of the citizens of that town. And finally, and this maybe beats the point of Mr. Lynch, the minutes from all of the committees and boards have to be put in the library within 45 days of the meeting. So any citizen can go to the library and see the minutes of every single functioning board or committee within that town. Finally, there's an article, separate article, that notice must be given to all abutters of town projects that are likely to suffer a detrimental impact as to noise, traffic, or other effects. So you can see it's a very pro-citizen, pro-participation charter, where you can see that there's clearly thought to have an interface with the public and how their government is affecting the local public. So I was impressed. The Arlington Charter is a very thoughtful and efficient charter. And next, would like to present Mr. Larry Pizer.
I had three, and I'm going to do sort of two of them at once. The city of Greenfield, which rather recently, say within the past 8 years, changed from a town to a city. And the city of Pittsfield, which has been a city for a rather long time. What came to my mind in both of these, and we're talking about Greenfield with 17,500 people, and Pittsfield with 42,800 people. When I was studying political science, we talked about legislative and executive functions. Towns and cities don't have a judicial function. And in Plymouth, it's pretty well defined. Town meeting is our legislature, the select board, and the manager and the rest of the people working for the town are part of the executive operation of the town. Very much not the case in either one of these towns. The mayor in Pittsfield can make an appointment, and then the council can reject his appointment. The council can pass ordinances, we call them bylaws in towns. The mayor can veto anything that the council does. So you have these theoretically separate bodies acting in a way that probably works in real life, but doesn't exactly make sense in theory. Like Bill's discussion, and let me say parenthetically, when I was a museum director, I was told that the budget is the statement, the best statement that the organization can make about what's really important. Well, in charters, you're going to find what the people of the community think is really important, so that in Greenfield, they're interested in maintenance, and they have a specific statement about maintenance in the charter. And I suspect that that's going to be a lesson to us. If there's something that we see as important, we ought to note that when we get to that. The other pieces, the councils are elected. In both cases, there are 4 at large. In Pittsfield's case, there is 1 per each of the 7 wards. In Greenfield's case, it's 1 per each of the 9 precincts. This becomes a little bit challenging for Plymouth in that we keep growing. And anytime, if we were going to have at-large members, we would have to figure out how is it that we're going to define the districts from which councilors are going to be elected if we choose to have some of the councilors on a district matter. Found it very interesting that the town of Greenfield doesn't trust its employees. In the budget, in the charter, it specifically talks about what happens if you overspend your budget. I didn't even think that was a possibility in Plymouth, at least when I was working there. But they go in and there's actual statement of personal liability if you overspend the money that's allotted to you. Elected, the one of the issues that's different in Greenfield, the council elects the clerk because a clerk is going to be the clerk of the council as well as the clerk of the community. In Pittsfield, the voters elect the clerk. And one final item that I found interesting is that Pittsfield has a preliminary election so that if there are 3 people running for one position, in the preliminary election, it's lowered to 2. It's always double the number of positions that are available, so that the final election is based on twice the number of people who are there. Obviously, that's an item that we're going to have to think about. Finally, in both cases, there is an initiative and referendum, both capability, so that it's a fair number of signatures. I think Mr. Hanlon knows about a fair number of signatures. It's kind of tough. But if you get those signatures, you can actually propose something that first the council must take up, and then if the council rejects it, you can get another group of signatures and bring it to a vote of the people. True in both of these communities. Since Natick is different,
We have something like that in Plymouth.
non-binding, but they're talking about binding. Towns are not allowed to have binding decisions. Let someone else take it, and then sometime we'll come back and
So
I'll do Natick.
can I ask, Mr. Chairman, is there a chance that we can ask a few questions of some of the research that's been done? I just had a question for Larry. Can we do it that way too? When we get a book report, we can ask a few questions. Larry, I know there was an initiative that was on the ballot last year called ranked choice voting. You were talking about Pittsfield and how their mayor council is elected. You were talking, there wasn't one, do you know of whether or not an individual town can adopt that policy of ranked choice voting where you have to achieve that a number of percentage of the voters to hold that office. Did Pittsfield, when you were explaining the first and third, what was that reference towards?
Well, the preliminary election was to, for example, the election that we had 2 days ago, there would have been a preliminary election to go from 4 to 2. And then the final 2 would have run against one another in a separate election. What your question about ranked choice voting, Cambridge operates that way, and I believe that Northampton does. So it's obviously possible for a municipality to do it. I think that Amherst has brought it up as a possibility, but Amherst recently changed from a town meeting form. I don't know whether it's available to towns. I think it is.
You did Amherst?
Oh, I had a quick question. David? Just a quick question, David, I'm sorry. As a town clerk, as a former town clerk, how would you consider these preliminary elections to burden the clerk's department?
Every election is an adventure. And yes, it's a burden, and it's, democracy is the most important thing that the town clerk's office does by far. And therefore, as long as we understand that we have to pay for anything that we mandate, every hour that the clerk's office spends running elections, they're not doing dog licenses or birth certificates, so therefore maybe there would have to be one extra employee or something of that sort. But that, I think that the philosophical matter is more important than the burden on the clerk's office.
Thank you.
So,
So what specifically was your question, Bill, about Amherst? Was the question, do they have preliminary and finals?
I think the question was ranked choice voting.
They have that in their charter as to be studied. So the Charter Commission recommended it, it is in their charter, but, their charter's only been in action for about a year and a half, so it's premature. Because they also suggested 3 or 4 other initiatives for the town to investigate. So it's premature to know, but the Charter Commission in Amherst believed ranked choice voting was important enough to put it in their charter.
So the idea about David Malaguti, the idea behind the ranked choice voting was to avoid just what you indicated with the clerk, that rather than having one election where you whittle it down to 2 and then you have another election, you're talking about a cost that you're incurring that is not efficient with the use of the clerk's office or the time of the voter. So ranked choice voting takes care of that in one election. You go in, you vote for the guy you like, or the woman you like, or whoever, and then you vote for the second person that you like, and then the third. And then so that if one person doesn't achieve 50% of the turnout of the people who voted, then you would go down and eliminate the low person and take his second choices and split them up against the others. And then eventually, you would have a candidate that would have achieved that goal of achieving at least 50%. Is it the people who voted on the election, or, yeah, the people who voted on the election?
Okay, just to clarify that particular question, in the Amherst Charter, within 6 months of the assumption of office by the town council should create a ranked choice voting commission for the purpose of proposing it. So it's specifically proposed, but it's not endorsed, but the commissioners thought it an important initiative.
Okay. Any other, who else would like to donate a charter? David?
Yeah, I would like to say, just before I was away for 2 weeks, I had sent in my homework, which is in everybody's folders, about, I looked at Amherst, Barnstable, and Watertown, with a particular focus on, these are council manager, not council mayor forms of government. I wanted to just see the details, but also the commonalities. So in the sheets you have in front of you, what's common to all three of them, although following Bill, I'll maybe talk of the details of just one or two, but everyone, votes in November on the odd-numbered years, as Larry's pointed out, so that instead of a 10% turnout, by and large, November votes will have 2 to 3 times higher citizen participation. Every council form meets at least once a month, normally twice a month except in summer. So instead of our twice a year turnouts, you would have your legislative council meeting far more frequently. No town employee may serve on the council, nor for 12 months after their term expires. So the issues of how many town employees or their relatives are town meeting members becomes irrelevant because town employees cannot serve on a council, period. In the deliberations, any council member can postpone discussion on any topic. So there's sort of an internal, I'd say, if not veto, kind of postponement thing that allows a council to be slow. If something's going along too fast, any concerned member can slow it down to say, wait a minute, we're going to postpone for further discussion. Supplementary budgets can be adopted at any time during the year with due process. So we've heard at multiple meetings the issue by waiting 6 months. We often lose a chance for grants, but more to the point, we have to wait and incur potential half a year worth of inflation on any project that has costs that will be affected by inflation. So that's another strength. So this is in all three of the ones I looked at. Town manager must move to town within 12 months of being hired. So it's a form of, some of these important senior people need to be residents of their town. Capital improvement is articulated in detail in all of the plans, that there have to be 5-year plans updated annually. There have to be cost estimates, method of financing, time schedules, and the estimated annual cost of operating and maintaining the facilities. This is articulated in all three of the charters I looked at. Amherst is interesting because it's almost one of the most recent ones. It was adopted in 2017, but only has gone into effect in the last year and a half. Town is about 40,000 people, only an $85 million budget. They have council size of 13, 2-year terms, some district reps, some at large. Council president and a vice president are elected by the council with a 1-year term. The payment, we've heard in past meetings a worry about the costs of a council form of government would be quite expensive with the payment that councilors would get paid. It's not a lot different than our current town. So it's $5,000 for a councilor, $7,500 for a council president. One interesting fact in Amherst is no council member shall give orders or direction publicly or privately to any employee of the town not appointed by the council. So individual council members cannot privately give directions or things to town employees. Again, they meet once a month or basically twice a month. They have a form of district representation as well as at large. The charter requires every district representative to have at least 2 meetings annually with members of his district. So maybe it's a form of a caucus, but it's a required turnout in paying attention to the public. The council appoints the clerk, planning board, ZBA, and non-voting liaisons to multiple member bodies. Every action of the council requires 2 readings. So any issue, could be zoning, it could be budget, whatever comes up, they cannot take action at the first hearing. So it has to be presented at least 2 weeks apart or more before they take action. Instead of waiting necessarily for 6 months, it's kind of 2 weeks apart. The council has to have 2 public, town-wide public forums with the entire town to discuss the budget and to discuss the master plan. In several of these charters, master plan is very important. Ours is, by the way, it's articulated in our charter, the importance of a master plan. But it requires the council to specifically meet with the public on the budget and the master plan. School committee has to have 1 public forum as well, townwide, and the town manager has to attend all of them. The charter creates a position of a community participation officer whose sole job is to improve community participation in all aspects of town affairs. School committee's 5 members. They have elected library trustees, interesting. The budget schedule is outlined in the charter. There has to be a capital inventory of significant capital assets annually, as well as the capital improvement plan. I'd mentioned supplementary budgets can be adopted anytime during the year. The charter also creates a board of license commissioners, so that separately the board can create a group that works on, alcohol permits and parade permits and things, some of which tie up our select board on permits. And I mentioned ranked choice voting. So I can come back at a future meeting with comments on the other 2 towns, but Amherst is interesting because it's one of the most recently adopted ones and has a lot of progressive thoughts in it.
Thank you, David.
And I would recommend, again, it's maybe as we kind of fine-tune our discussions and listening, that other members get a copy of the most interesting charters to read. Because I think Amherst, I would also say, and I think others have mentioned this, the Amherst process was incredibly participatory. Their website, you can read on it the report of the majority, the report of the minority, the report of 1 member who abstained from voting. This commission went out to every public event and set up a table to encourage participation by citizens through their process. So they did a remarkable, I think, participatory process in developing their charter. So it's worth other members studying as well. So,
No, I was impressed. There's things in the Amherst Charter which definitely have legs that we should look at. I agree. David?
This is going to sound really stupid for somebody who served 22 years on the Board of Selectmen, but I find fault with the 2-year terms in the Amherst situation. I think the first year is really a learning process, and I think you need more time. The first year you're learning, the second year you kind of got your sea legs and you kind of go on from there. And then the 3rd year and maybe perhaps even the 4th year, that's when you really start to accomplish something.
yeah, well, it's interesting again, if you see the sheet, Barnstable has 4-year terms. I mean, so it's just, again, I kind of highlighted Amherst, but that's a good point to make. And that comes back to the earlier comment about training and orientation.
Yeah.
That, whatever charter we do, I think encouraging training and orientation is critical.
Well, just from my own experiences, when I was elected in 1981, I had been 3 years on the Finance Committee, a year and a half as chairman. And Finance Committee and Board of Selectmen, it's not even apples and oranges, it's apples and water buffaloes. It's literally that different, So at that particular tenure, I was on for 9 years. I got off in 1990. But then when I came back in 1998, we had gone from executive secretary to town manager, and that was a whole new learning process. So I think the 2 years is not enough. And I should probably say, I'm in favor of term limits, too. I don't believe in our congressmen and our senators to be there for 38 or 40 years. So I kind of believe in term limits, but I think you need more than 2.
Yeah, I just mentioned, again, it's on the sheet there, Barnstable, also a council form, has a 12-year, 3 terms or a 12-year max term limits. So a good thing.
David,
Yes.
you talked about training and orientation. There was an aspect of the charter that dedicated some language to that?
I wasn't paying attention to that. Those comments on training and orientation are based on what we talked about tonight.
Okay, okay. So,
Good idea.
Yeah, yep. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, you said a communications person you found in the charter that is dedicated to?
Participation.
Yeah, in
Particip-
improving community participation in aspects of the community. I thought it was a terrific idea.
Yeah, I like that. That's very interesting. And then there was this capital inventory that you speak of. Was it just, what kind of assets? Were they looking at tax, what they
They're
control and own?
looking at buildings, trucks, all assets. The
Capital
char-
assets,
The
yeah.
charter puts a heavy requirement on, and actually all three charters in a way, on being on top of the capital needs and having a rotating 5-year plan, but also having a good inventory that's updated annually on all the capital assets of the town.
So when you talk about capitals, it's assets of that caliber.
It's, yes, it's
Okay.
buildings, it's
So the
fire
other-
trucks.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other thing was, so on the council, any one council could postpone a vote on something.
Yes,
And there's always going to be a first reading that they can't vote on anyways that first night.
correct,
Then there's the second reading is the earliest you can vote on something.
yes.
But someone could still postpone it the second night, theoretically.
I got to reread whether they
Yeah,
can.
kind of interesting
whether it's
thing.
on-
This
on
is
the
just
first
making-
reading or the second reading, but,
Yeah.
but it empowers an individual council member
Yeah.
to say, you're going too fast.
Got it. That was my point. Councils tend to move fast. They seem to be having a braking mechanism there. The other thing I just.
It is interesting that, again, in more than one charter, members can use that veto or that slow-down power, not every single meeting.
But it only pertains to certain activities such as zoning changes, you said? Is it? No, everything.
Any action of the
The board.
council.
Okay, good.
Can be kind of.
All right. And then the final question I had for you is you mentioned something about the council can give no direct, a council person cannot
Yes.
go to an employee and tell them what to do.
That's right, so.
They have to go through the town manager,
Well,
or the mayor.
right, no, there's
The
no mayor.
head,
I'm not.
No.
Suggesting a mayor, but
Yeah.
just, no council member can talk to, the labor steward and the DPW
Right.
and give them directions.
So if a council person has a constituent coming to them and asking them a question,
Then it has to go to the kind of the full council,
the full council?
yeah.
It's
Or
taken
you go to
up.
the town manager. I mean, if it's kind of a
Okay.
town administrator, if it's
So
a
it starts
smaller
there.
issue, but
So-
the counselor can't say, do this,
Okay. He has to bring it up at the meeting, and they pursue it from there.
right,
Okay.
which I think is also good.
And then you indicated that town employees cannot serve on councils.
Correct.
Can they serve in any other committee or board in town?
I would have to look or to ask, but,
these are just-
the specific language is,
Yeah.
can't serve on the council.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Yeah, nor for 12 months after they've
Got
left
it.
the council.
All right, thank you very much, David. That was helpful.
Thanks, David. That was fairly comprehensive. I appreciate your understanding of that, and I think we all see.
Again, I tried to set up a template, where I also said, okay, how many people live there, what the pay scale is for the council members.
I think there's
And
a lot.
when the charter was adopted, because to me, hopefully in our discussion, when we invite guests, whether it's Braintree or Watertown or Barnstable or wherever, and of course, we have Zoom technology, so we can invite somebody from Pittsfield or
That's right.
Provincetown to ask them questions. But just see, how well is it working? And what, so I mean, we can read this and say, wow, there's some good ideas there, but,
Yeah,
when the rubber hits the road, is it working
A little
well?
reality test, they'll tell us something different
Yeah.
on Zoom
Right.
that they wouldn't tell us elsewhere. Well, I did want to bring up something that other people brought up, the community participation officer. We've talked about that, a communication officer or something along that. I have some ideas of that for the town. But one of the critical questions I have in that regard is this a paid employee? Is this a staff member?
Well, let me look it up. I will tell you what, because first I did my notes and kind of what the reference was. So 3.3, Community Participation Officer. The town manager shall appoint a community participation officer to increase participation in local government by diverse residents as described in 3.3C. Such officer may be a current town employee. The officer will provide support for individuals interested in becoming involved in local government, devise and implement strategies to enhance public engagement, conduct outreach efforts to increase participation by underrepresented residents in town government, aid in planning and conducting the district meetings, analyzing data on resident engagement, and regularly submit reports to the town manager and the town council, and carry out any other duties. But, you know, it sounded good.
It sounds like they're going to tell somebody that has one job, you do this too.
Yeah,
But I definitely can see that as a paid position, an important position,
Yeah.
especially in this community where we understand that we're not doing a good job of engaging people on the processes of government
Agreed,
and their own
which is why it
participation.
caught my attention.
Also, let me ask about the Board of License Commissioners, or get a little more details, because there was a gentleman tonight, I didn't catch his name, who spoke during public comment, and one of the things he said, which I laughed at, but I think is a relevant comment, is that sometimes, or oftentimes, our select board, our executive leaders, are bound up in trivial matters.
Yes.
And he's, licenses, administrative notes, a bunch of things like that, when they should be probably focusing on leading the town, on having, the master plan administered, whatever it might be. So I really see that as a potentially relevant, whatever, again, charter we choose, however we iterate a charter, that's something I'd really like to see, maybe those duties cut away.
So how would you, that's interesting, so, how do you think that would look? You're basically suggesting that.
As they have a board of licensed commissioners, and these could be people far better suited to reviewing these kinds of
Yeah.
licenses than the select. I sat through as a reporter 10 years of the board of select persons never saying no to a liquor license. I'm not saying they should have, but I am saying the process was fairly streamlined and not necessarily, there was no, as Mr. Neville was saying, standard of review for, there were a few stock questions and it went through, but more so, it's the time that is given to those things when they really should be leading the town. They should be rallying the town. That's my personal opinion, and I think that would be one of the ways to free them up.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
as I said, that was in more than one charter. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm reading the Amherst one, but
Yeah, I
I
saw
think
that
at
as
least
well.
Watertown did the same thing.
So just to Frank's point involving the Board of Selectmen, it's interesting how some of these things come back and they're beginning to repeat themselves in various charters. The Bill Ricker charter, the thing that impressed me was their provision on the Board of Selectmen, and it met your point. It says, "The Board of Selectmen is the chief policy-making agency of the town responsible for issuance of policy directives and guidelines. No selectman," this is right in their charter, "no selectman shall be involved in day-to-day administration of affairs of the town. Selectmen shall act only through adoption of policy directives and guidelines to be implemented by officers and employees." So I mean, they must have serious thinking along your lines, and they actually put as much language in the charter as they could.
Yeah.
And they even carried out further that the town manager makes all the appointments, and the selectmen have very little to say. In Bill Ricker, they have essentially isolated and make the selectmen the philosopher kings, whatever you want to call it, the chief policy. All they do is sit there and make policy and guidelines. And this is one of the big problems, I think, in Plymouth, that our selectmen are just so bound up in the trivia. So it was a good model. Larry?
Just wanted to, there are so many, as David noted,
Yeah.
too many parts of the charter for us to,
Right.
we just read the whole thing. Both Pittsfield and Greenfield have the same no employee and a
Yeah.
year, obviously, they don't want a council member to use being a council member to then become town auditor,
Right.
town clerk, town treasurer, but same thing.
Right. And David, these other charters also, anytime they deal with the council, it's interesting, they have that delayed feature. In Somerville, if somebody brings up a vote at the council meeting and it passes, it can pass in 1 week if it's unanimous. But if one counselor is against it, it's delayed a week.
Yeah.
Then when it comes up to the next meeting, same thing applies, except there, if 3 counselors are, again, it's delayed a second week. So there is this, so I guess, a check and balance to keep speedy action.
Yeah.
I had one question for you. Is Amherst voting in the fall or in the spring?
In the fall.
Okay, let me just say as to
It's in
this.
the off, first Tuesday of November,
Right.
in each odd-numbered year.
You know, I've thought long and hard about this, and I don't have any particular interest either way, but I'm hard pressed to see why a town election makes sense in the fall. And the only thing you can point to is the participation. But in the fall, you're bound up with state issues, national issues. And the town's issues get buried in the run-up to these, much larger elections. So I'm just not convinced. Maybe you get a higher percentage of people voting, but it could be much less thoughtful voting as to what's going on in the town. I think there's a real value in spring elections dealing strictly with local issues that you can focus on. And they become, there's other ways to get the higher percentages out, but not switching it to the fall, where I think you're going to get the town election buried in, other issues. David?
Just to also clarify, Frank did sit through many liquor hearings. There are criteria that you have to consider when you're awarding a liquor license. And we did deny some licenses. But then there's an appeal to the ABCC, and the town gets superseded. On one occasion, I went to the ABCC, and they superseded the town and granted the license. And on a second occasion, I went to the ABCC, and they agreed with the town and denied the license. But there is always that final step that, supersedes whatever you decide at the local level. They come in and they say, you got to give this license. There's no reason to refuse it. So, again, I'm going to say, like I said in the first, when I first, my off the cuff comments, I think more and more of the things that you take away from the Board of Selectmen, you emasculate the board even further. So I'm not overly in favor of that, but that's just my comments.
Bill, you're talking about fall or spring elections. That's almost easily a function of whether we decide to have a council or a town meeting. Town meetings, town elections must be in the winter or spring, and council elections are restricted to odd-numbered years. So theoretically, those are the year, like this year, there is no state election. And so Boston and their compadres are having their elections then.
And Larry, and why do you see that was done for the purpose of, why would you put off town form of governments to the winter or spring, and why was that? Is there any rationale behind that?
Yes, it's historical, and I mean, this is something that the state has the power to amend, but town meeting has to be done in order to pass a budget before July 1st. So the town election typically in smaller communities, which we're now talking history, was Article 1. And Article 1 was taken up at 8 o'clock in the morning and completed by 10 o'clock in the morning when they went to Article 2, which was the rest of town meeting. So therefore, town elections had to be done in the spring. And then as towns grew, it was not practical to hold the election as part of town meeting, but the law remained that the elections had to take place in a time frame of, I think it's February to June.
So we're going back quite some time in terms of how town meetings met and were elected to take care of business, and it was done at that time.
Yeah, I
Almost
mean, the thing is,
simultaneously.
when you think
But then
back,
at one point, they then separated the two events at a distance, a greater distance than they are today.
we're talking about town meetings, pre-representative
Yeah.
town meetings. So
Yep.
if you had an open town meeting,
Yeah, it didn't matter.
that's the whole population.
Yeah.
And therefore, the election and the town meeting was part of the whole population.
Okay. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Others, let me just say a little more on Bill Ricca, and which has some more, I think, some good guidelines here for Plymouth. In Bill Ricca, the moderator shall be a town meeting member by virtue of his office, and the charter states specifically that all powers of the town rest in the town meeting. In Bill Ricca, the town council examines every warrant article that in order, before it can go to town meeting. So there's much more active participation of town council in that town. In fact, there's another charter article in the Bill Ricca charter that says all opinions of town council with respect to any town matter or made for any town agency must be kept in a record book that's fully available to the public to access it. So all these opinions that over the years we've wondered what Copeland and Page said, or whatever, they're all going to, Bill Ricca anyway, they're all made available in a very clearly accessible book. The town manager in Bill Ricca is appointed for a 5-year term from a list of nominees specifically furnished by a screening committee. The whole process is spelled out in their charter. If there's a vacancy in elective town office in Bill Ricca, like a selectman, there's no election. It's filled by the candidate from the most recent election who receives at least 25% of the votes. So they have a process that automatically picks a person who's going to fill that vacancy. Just a few things, but it's interesting, these charters have little tidbits in there that might become relevant. Larry.
I think state law excludes selectmen from that list. So
Didn't say
every
so in the charter.
elected official
Except-
except selectmen can be that method.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out another thing, the issue between ordinances and charter. I mean, what I saw in the three I looked at is, I think Barnstable in particular, but even Watertown, do more things by ordinance and less in the charter. So the charter gets a little kind of more high level and constitutional, and it says the meeting shall be determined by ordinance, or, or different things. So it's a different approach, although I guess we do it. We've got our charter and then we've got our bylaws. So it's interesting choice of approaches.
Okay, other contributions? Betsy?
No, I wanted to add, is there a chance we're going to get back to Arlington? You presented Arlington. I had some questions on Arlington. Can I ask those questions at some point? We kind of jumped to the next person. I had some questions on.
Questions on these charters?
Yeah, I'm asking questions on the charter, yes.
Yeah.
Could I ask a couple of questions on it? Okay. When you just talked about disclosures before speaking at town meeting, where somebody was to speak at town meeting, they took the microphone, and they were required to state if they had any conflicts pertaining to the article they were about to speak on. So if the article had something to do with anything that didn't have anything to do with themselves or their family or a close relative, they didn't state it, but they were required to get up. If they were going to talk on the, some aspect of the budget, that they had a family member
Yeah,
or
anybody
themselves.
who stood up would have to say, I'm a school teacher, but I'm just standing up front, but I want to comment on this
Okay.
this article.
Because we had a pretty healthy debate a few years back about the conflict of interest and how do we manage that at town meeting. I never heard that come up as a possible option. There was quite a bit of concern about the proposals being made at the time, but I didn't know that you can require that in a charter,
suggestion?
that when someone speaks, they have to declare their conflict if they have one.
Conversely, somebody else could get up and say, I'm a lawyer, and I'm involved but I do want to make a comment about it.
Right.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
I think it's a very civil way to approach that issue.
Yeah, I just think it's, that we explore that deeper.
Bill,
Now, when you're saying the speaking.
Before you go on to that, I suspected that it's sort of self-policing.
Yes.
Because there's no way of penalizing. I mean, an elected official has been elected to do his job. But if you put something like that in the charter, we're saying, this is what we expect. And obviously, there can be pressure put on a person who doesn't do it, but it's not exactly, you're not going to execute them for.
No, I wasn't calling about that.
Call to account.
It does just formalizes some language around the fact when you stand up and you start to speak, that there is some understanding of that.
Yeah, but what it doesn't do, it just affects speakers, right? So if a town meeting member chooses not to speak but has a potential conflict, then they're protected by the
Yeah.
the
So they're
state
not,
law.
so in this, because then we get to that thing, during that whole conflict of interest discussion, they are legally allowed to vote on these things. And so you can't really stop that event, but the speaking we have to hear, in this case, the speaking we get to hear if there is a conflict, and like Larry says, it's self-policing. But in the end, it doesn't encroach on that Mass General law that allows them to vote on the matter. And then, Bill, when you talked about speaking at town meeting, you can do it once,
Yes.
you can do it twice and 3 times.
The third time he needs to consent of the whole body.
On the same article.
Yes.
This is not like
No,
if I go to,
same
yeah, if you get talkative on Article
No,
1.
Just one article.
It's just one article, okay. And then reconsidering, you said that if an article is to be reconsidered, before you debate it the first time and before you vote on it first time, you make it known to the monitor that you're going to reconsider it regardless of,
This is when it goes over a second night.
say it again?
The issue here is when your town meeting adjourns for the evening,
Yep,
and then the next night.
Yep.
Or next, whatever, a later day. There's been at least as long as I've been a town meeting member, there's always that possibility that night that the other side will get motivated. And as soon as, in the next session, somebody will move to reconsider it. And it's just kind of, it's basically operates as a surprise.
right.
I'm not hearing you, Bill.
Yeah, so, Bill, can you lean into your microphone, because I can't hear you down
So I'm
there?
just saying that it would work where the town meeting goes more than one session, that somebody who wanted to reconsider a vote taken at the first session would have to announce that they're going to reconsider it at the next session, but they have to make that announcement before the first session adjourns for the day, so that there won't be any surprise or unpreparedness the next night. And this has happened. I mean, I've seen it happen at our town meeting more than once.
So Bill, so if there is a debate, and then there is a vote, and they're going to adjourn that night, that if there isn't going to be, if you can't reconsider the vote the next night if you didn't make it known before the adjournment of the first night, that it was discussed initially.
Exactly.
You, like at our town meeting can go 3 nights, and you could revisit an article on the last night.
I'm putting the town meeting on notice that I intend to make a motion to reconsider.
Okay, okay. So you're just putting putting people on notice. Do you think that would trigger people just getting up? It's like, well, I better put this in as a fail-safe measure, because rather than just kind of letting the events of town meeting happen, and I know people, you'd probably trigger more, you should err on the side of caution, might as well get up and
Well,
say you're going to reconsider, but you might not.
Over the years, we've had historic issues that have been very, very controversial.
Right.
And that's the kind of
Okay.
issue I'm thinking about.
Okay, I get it. The other thing I had was, You mentioned, I think it was Arlington, you mentioned consolidating the technology departments
Yeah.
or something?
Right.
What was that? What
It
was
was
that?
information systems, information, a specific area in the charter for a department.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting, because right now, obviously, technology is growing in terms of a reliability of a municipality. And just recently, we elevated our Department of,
It was called Consolidated Information Technology Department. And it was formed by a charter amendment in 2007.
yep,
And it just says, the Director of Information Systems shall be appointed by the town manager and shall see to the day-to-day responsibilities of the department and its functions all spelled out, and they have to also include the school system.
okay. So I just noticed that here in Plymouth, we've recently elevated our, the computer technology division to a department head level. And so I just was curious about that explanation in Arlington, so.
I mean, Bill, I think there's a lot of things we need to modernize our charter like this, but there's others too on voter rights. I mean, there's things we need to bring it into this
Right.
present.
The last question I had on your Arlington, you talked about minutes. They were required to be
Yep.
filed by, not executive minutes, but the general meetings of a committee. There was a deadline.
That's
How?
all minutes of all agencies,
Yeah.
and within 45 days of the meetings.
And Larry, as a clerk, I know that I had to deal with that quite a bit, making sure I had my minutes in to your office.
And actually placed the library in a book of minutes, so that a citizen could just go to the library and check and read the minutes of any of these meetings.
Right. Okay.
Two things.
Yeah.
One is, we might well think about putting something about minutes somewhere. You either suggest it as a bylaw or better than that in the charter, because minutes are not being enforced. And secondly, our minutes are available at the moment they are created. So if somebody goes to Michelle and says, I want the minutes of tonight's meeting, hopefully they'll wait till 7:30 tomorrow, you're obligated to give them as a draft. And you cannot say, and this is true of all boards and commissions, you cannot say they're not approved by the commission. You can say, these are the raw draft minutes. And this is the sort of thing that I think that we might well be advised to put something like that in the charter so that there's just no question.
Good.
What's that?
Just she agrees.
Larry, I'm not taking minutes, actually. I'm noting some important points, but I go back to the tape and start.
Well, if that's the case, then the law says, this is public records, and I hate them, everyone hates them, but that's too bad. The law says the tape, a copy of the tape has to be available until you turn that into minutes. But whatever the record of a body is, at the moment it's created, is public record. And it changes then. I mean, you have every right to destroy the tape once you create paper. But if you don't, then both of them are public record. And we need to say something about that to clarify.
Yeah, I think that, a clarification of that would be something you'd want to formalize, because Michelle brings up an important point. As the staff person listening to this meeting, she's taping it. It's being taped by PAC television, but you're not recording it on a little device. Okay, so you record it, it's being recorded by TAC television, there's highlights that are being taken, so at the very earliest stages, there's very primitive information that you would direct the person to go get PAC television as your source until we had something formally written in a draft form that we would then vote on. But you're right, you'd probably want to formalize something there to give somebody some direction so there isn't any confusion.
Betsy?
Yes, open meeting law covers minutes very thoroughly, and that brings to mind, and that means any notes even taken by the secretary, like if you took 7 notes tonight, then someone could come to you tomorrow and say, I would like to have a copy of those notes, if I understand open meeting law correctly. But I wanted to add to that, that I believe by state law, each of us should have turned in by now a certificate for conflict of interest as well as a certificate for open meeting law. So, that's my understanding, that we are required by the state, all of us, to turn in those certificates. Now, I don't know if anybody knows something different from that, but when I was the chairman of the Open Space Committee as well as other committees, I always asked the people on my committee to complete those 2 documents, and it has to be done every 2 years, so the fact that you've done it in the last 2 years would cover you, but if you haven't done it in the last 2 years, each of us is actually required to do this. So I think if I'll go back and redo, I haven't done open meeting law for a couple of years, I'll go back and redo that certificate. But what my memory is, that is covered. Anything about minutes is covered in the open meeting law for the state.
Because you have the open meeting law, which is state guide law, and then you have our charter. You know, I'm never opposed to this idea of putting more legal footprints around one document to give some aid to that person serving in that capacity, know that they have to do this other thing, that even if it wasn't there, they still had to do it. You know, it's kind of an interesting component to this idea of better communicating with people serving in that capacity, and for residents looking at the charter. It's kind of, you know, I never have a problem with putting it in multiple locations. Maybe some of the formalized language around the minutes in the open meeting law might be giving some future person some guidance on how to handle that matter, or resident to learn more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have one more thing to say about this bill, and that's something that Larry alluded to earlier. I remember from many years ago, somebody said to me, what's everybody's job is nobody's job. And what happens is there's really no one, and I asked this question a number of times, there's no one in the town of Plymouth who right now makes sure, his job it is to make sure that everybody has completed a conflict of interest certificate as well as an open meeting law certificate, or that their meetings minutes are posted properly. There's nobody whose job that is, so it just sort of, at least when I called a number of times, I think I actually talked to you about this, Larry, where are these being housed? Where are these certificates? Because I had all the certificates for conflict of interest and open meeting law from my meetings, I mean, that I was chairman of, my boards or committees, but I didn't know who to give them to even. Nobody wanted them. So I think we would have to much more formalize who's responsible, because if nobody's responsible, then nobody's accountable, and then nobody does it, or doesn't do it as, maybe as much as they should.
Not to belabor the point, but years ago, the town used to bring in town council, put them in a room, and invite all people into that room to get the education that they would needed to certify them. So there was actually a deliberate effort to have a meeting to get people certified under open meeting law.
But somebody, I think, has to be responsible. Maybe we want to put that in the charter. Whose job is it to be sure that the open meeting law and the conflict of interest law is actually being followed, as well as the minutes? We're talking about getting minutes properly posted, but nobody's job is to do that. And I think that would be a tough job, by the way. There's so many boards and committees to make sure that all the minutes are posted properly. So it really tends to be complaint-driven, like if somebody complained, I can't find the minutes, that's, I think, more often how the minutes get posted. Because I know when I was the chairman, I got, there were some problems in my own life, and I got probably 3 or 4 months behind on minutes because, by the way, another problem with posting minutes is that the posting them online can be quite difficult. Figuring out how to get those minutes up on the website can be difficult. If you're a brand new chairman of your committee, you may not know how to get those minutes up onto the website so that they're legally posted. So you know, you can put them in the library, but that doesn't mean people can access them very well on the website. So it's complicated, and it's something that's really important that I think we should address and find a way to address.
Yeah, I think when
If I may, sadly, there are two parts of conflict of interest. If you have a personal conflict of interest, then you file that with the clerk. That's one thing. But it's also the case that there is a requirement that all employees, paid or unpaid, and we qualify, sadly, in the unpaid category, are required I think it's every 2 years, to, the State Ethics Commission has an online training document, and it's necessary for you to take a test, pass the test, and there is someone who's responsible for it. The town manager has designated the Human Resources Department, and they're falling down on the job. But there is someone who's responsible. It's not something, I don't think, that we have to put in the charter. It's just something that perhaps you might want to talk to HR and ask them if they could let all of us know so that we're in compliance.
So HR is not only involved in, it's for everyone serving in any of these capacities. So there is an entity within the town that is required to keep oversight and record of that.
I believe in Plymouth, it's the town manager who has delegated that authority to Human Resources. I know as employees, we were required, after we took the test, the last thing that happens is it prints out a certificate of completion.
Yep.
You then brought that to Human Resources. And
But-
so they're the ones who are collecting it, and they're doing it a bit passively rather
Okay,
than.
so that's for employees, but is this for everybody else serving on a committee and board in town meeting?
That, thank goodness it wasn't the clerk, but yes, I believe that it is all employees, paid or unpaid.
All employees are paid and unpaid, so when you're an unpaid employee, and the definition of that is a town meeting member, and someone
No,
serving on a board and committee.
Town meeting members are exempt, but boards and commissions are not. And I suspect, I might be the only one in compliance here, because I took the test.
I'm sorry, that's right, I'm sorry, not town meeting. So, okay, I understand now what you're saying, thank you.
Well, because in theory, when you get your appointment letter, it specifically mentions that in the appointment letter for both conflict of interest and open meeting. And they say, make sure you do those online things within the 2 years. So,
Okay, so we've started the exercise tonight with the charters. I think it's helpful. I think we ought to finish it, though, at the next meeting, if we can. We don't meet again until the 13th of September, which is a Monday, and then the 20th, which is a Monday. But I think certainly no later than the 20th, we should have covered all the charters, the ones that we're going to review. I think we still need to hear from Brookline, Chelmsford. I mean, these are big towns. I think Frank's got Brookline. Nobody signed up for Chelmsford. That's 34,000 people. Betsy, I think you have Dartmouth. That's another large one.
I have Brookline, the big one, and
Falmouth is
Williamstown.
another one we ought to hear from. So there are still some big towns out there that we need to hear from,
I can give a short report on Dartmouth tonight if you would like.
okay? And just a couple of the others.
I have three to
Natick
do.
is another. You got Natick. Okay. You didn't report on it yet? Not tonight, you didn't do it.
Yeah, let's,
I'll do whatever you tell me.
Oh, you can do it, okay. And I've got Shrewsbury, which is another large one. I'll take that one next time. But I think tonight we still have another 15 minutes to hear from maybe a couple of more charters, and then the balance, hopefully, in September.
Well, I think we only have, it's almost closing in at 9 o'clock now. I have
10 minutes.
I have
9:56.
9:56.
5 minutes, okay. Betsy, why don't you?
8:50.
4 minutes.
Right.
Rather than, do we want to rush it?
yeah,
We don't want to rush it.
I don't want to rush it.
I don't
no.
want to rush it. Why don't, it's now 9 o'clock.
I won't rush it.
Okay.
I'll just tell you what I have, because I don't.
Do you want to hold it to the next meeting? Because it's,
I don't have a lot of,
Then get more.
Okay, you can talk 5 minutes.
what I wrote down was from the Dartmouth charter, what I saw as I started with the legislative branch. So we were looking at what are differences or what might be interesting. One of the interesting things is that Dartmouth is half the size of Plymouth, population-wise, and they have 6 times as many town meeting members. They have 390 town meeting members, but there are only 34,000 people, so that's 6 times as many town meeting members. The way they fill vacancies there is that the town meeting members from that precinct automatically just vote for someone. There's no who gets the most votes or second most votes. That precinct just automatically votes in. So if somebody leaves, if they have a vacancy for town meeting, it's just automatically, they convene and vote in a new member. And it has to be, the only requirement is it has to be from that precinct. The other thing, they were a little more defined as to how precincts are decided. Like us, they say it has to be compact and contiguous, but they go on to say by the center line of known streets or ways or by other well-defined limits. But it goes on to say the boundaries shall be reviewed and wholly or partially revised by the districting board. And I think that's interesting to have a districting board. I know Larry you were the board all by yourself, if I recall. And I think to have a particular board that's what they do might be a good thing, because I think that we have had a hard time because of our size getting precincts that make sense. And I remember a neighbor of mine asking Larry why he made the decision, and Larry said, well, you decide. I mean, let me know what I could do better. And they said, oh, this is way complicated, more than I ever realized. And I know there are some people who only have to drive a mile to vote, but other people have to drive 20 miles. And that's definitely a barrier, I think, to voting in our town, and something that we should look at is how we set up our districts.
Betsy, if I could jump in before you go to the next part. They're mimicking state law on everything up to the commission that they established. But state law invests, and I don't want David's head to explode, invests in the Board of Selectmen the authority to set precinct lines. They have to accept the precinct lines, using the certain rights of way. But it is the Board of Selectmen's responsibility. And if they have a redistricting commission, that's simply taking what we were using, the clerk advising the Board of Selectmen, but the Board of Selectmen having the final authority. I think they must have a redistricting commission advising the Board of Selectmen.
Well, I'm sure it is advising, but they call it the districting board.
They call it the districting board. That's
Districting
interesting,
board.
Betsy, because
Yeah.
I have run into this problem because we just had we're having a census as we speak. The results of that census is going to affect our polling locations. I've had a little bit of time to do a little research around this, calling up the Secretary of State's office and trying to figure out how that information plays out here in Plymouth. And the way that it goes is that at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, there's an institute called the Donnelly Institute. They come up with maps, and they provide these maps to towns as advisory. They are nothing but advisory. That when you talk to the Secretary of State's office, they're telling you that the town of Plymouth has the ability to determine where its polling places are and how they'll be located, and that the selectmen have complete control over this, and that these maps that are coming in from the Donnelly Institute are just suggestions, and that in the end, the clerk is the entity in our town charter that advises the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen take the final thing. But I do believe that as the population grows, and as we start to get into 14, 15 precincts, 16 precincts, that definitely we're going to add another precinct to Plymouth, at least, maybe 2, that this language that you speak of, Betsy, where they're putting together a board, I think that might be some language we need to put into a charter, that whatever form of government we have, that there will be a, what do they call it?
A districting board.
Districting board that will advise the council, mayor, or town meeting, or whoever, select board. That should be some language that's formalized, because I think that's a very important thing, because Plymouth grows, and logistically, we should know how these polling locations, a precinct is created.
So
I'm
I
sorry,
can
can I ask-
continue with this next time if you like, if you wanted to end now. I just have a couple more comments, but before I comment more on Dartmouth, I want to say I'm astounded by all the fabulous ideas that came up tonight from all the different towns. David, you know, your report was marvelous.
Yeah,
and-
Betsy, that's the point I want to make, is not all of us have notes of all the things that did come up that we want to remember. So Michelle, each of us mentioned something that was unique. Can you put it in the minutes?
I want your notes.
Right, and we will review the minutes to be sure it got in there, because 6 months from now, we're going to want to remember
You-
those items.
You're not going to all provide me your hard copies of notes?
I'm glad to give you my hard copy,
Yeah.
yes, but I think a lot, what Bill is saying is that some off-the-cuff stuff is also being said that
Yeah.
maybe should be recorded.
So, yeah, so I think that David tonight provided a nice outline that I'm mimicking. That when
Yeah,
I
it's
saw how
great.
you lined it up,
Great job.
I started doing that. So that's how when I'm done with my book report, I plan to have something similar to David to give to
No, but
Michelle.
Bill, see, there'll be a town, and she'll write it up in the minutes, and she'll have a town, and there'll maybe be 5 or 6 lines. No more than that.
So the last thing about Dartmouth is that they have an elected Board of Health. Fairhaven does, Winchester does. A lot of towns have an elected Board of Health. They're not appointed by the selectmen. And some towns also have an elected board, Conservation Commission, but Dartmouth and Winchester are not two of those. But I think elected Board of Health might be a very important thing for us to look at. And I want to go back to polling places. The last Charter Commission, I requested that they discuss that it would say in the charter that all polling stations and all caucuses, and so, all meetings needed to be held in public buildings, not in restaurants or private clubs. And that was rejected. I will recommend that again. So thank you.
Okay, so
May
let's,
I make a comment? I know it's getting late. I have to say, if you have good town management, and I'd like to think that we did and still do, we had in the past elected town clerks, we had elected town treasurers, we had elected boards of health, we had elected public safety commissions, and you get back to the same old argument of it becomes a personality contest. If you have an appointing authority, it sounds good to have these positions elected, but if you have an appointing authority that has some criteria to go by, that person can pick the cream of the crop with the characteristics, education, experience, whatever, that you desire. But if you have a bunch of citizens at large running for these boards that are now appointed, it becomes a personality contest.
It's an interesting thing to note, because I've always, at different times, the zoning board of appeals, we've discussed this amongst ourselves, this idea that if was elected and wasn't appointed, that, who would be running for it? And what money would be spent to control a board like that? It would be coming in from the interested parties that are petitioning the board for some of the higher cost permitting and zoning activities. So I think that, David, you have a very strong point that some boards should be appointed, because it eliminates that conflict in money in the equation when it's competing elements within the town. But at the same time, Betsy, there's been examples recently with the Board of Health where things were handled in a way that was a concern to people.
So, yeah, I think I've seen cases which, just my opinion, just my thought was that the selectmen wanted to appoint the least controversial person, the person who would make the least waves, rather than the person who might be best for the job. So it's got both sides to it. I understand there's more than one side, and I appreciate, David, I appreciate your comments. I also want to talk about something totally different. A resident came up to me and said that we had, I actually was the one who suggested that we hear from every single person who ran for the Charter Commission. And they said, we haven't done that yet as a Charter
We're in the
Commission.
process of doing that. Betsy.
And so that's what I thought. We do have that on our agenda for the future.
Actually,
Is
I
that
think she already
correct?
did send an invite to all of them. Right? We did that way very.
You've
early on.
invited all of these people, like Catherine Holmes and
People who ran for the
and
Charter
Sarah
Commission.
Sibley, and they chose not to come?
So there's
Well,
another,
we've already had two come.
Two
Peter-
come,
Peter
right.
Spahn and
Michael Hanlon, right.
but we're working on a specific invitation that will go out to the individuals who ran in this capacity and other people who serve on boards and committees throughout the town.
Okay.
So there'll be a specific written invitation that goes out to let them know that we're meeting, and this is our schedule. Please come into public comment, let staff know, so that if someone is coming in that capacity that we've invited, it would give them that opportunity to get into that part of our schedule.
So just to be clear, I can tell this resident that all of the people who ran for the Charter Commission and were not elected have been invited to speak and chose not to.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's,
That's not accurate,
They
no.
didn't choose not to. It's not going to, hasn't happened yet.
It hasn't happened yet.
Oh, but it's going to happen.
I guess, the commission has extended an invitation to everyone in the community to come in and speak. Michelle, is this correct?
Recollection, I don't have access to the email right now.
Yeah.
But I believe we emailed the third meeting maybe, the June 10th, the 24th of June. I think all of the the committee candidates were invited.
To come to that particular meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
That's when Russell Shirley appeared on our meeting.
And
Michelle, you did that a
Joe,
while
did you
ago. I
get
showed the
that?
list.
Did you get that
Done.
I
invitation?
can't.
Joe is a candidate who was not elected for Charter Commission, but he's saying he didn't receive an invitation.
An email. You did not receive an email asking to come to a meeting? Okay.
Okay.
He's been in twice.
So maybe we need to do that again.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, that we're working on we got a mailing list of these individuals. and we're
A
working
specific,
with-
not just a general to the
No,
public, but
specifically to that.
specific to them. Okay, thank you.
All right, let's,
You need to go to the microphone, no one's going to hear you.
Joe, you can stay, but let's wrap it up. Is there the minutes of August 5th are in the packet. Is anybody ready to move them tonight?
I have one major.
Okay, go ahead.
That, on page 4, under my comments, it says state mandate with a D, and there shouldn't be a D, just state mandate. Oh, sorry. Page 4 of the minutes, it says, Lawrence Pizer said, it says state mandated, and it should just say state mandate.
that's a spelling correction.
Any other comments? Are we
That's
ready
it.
to vote the minutes, or do you want to do it next time?
Move the minutes as corrected.
Is there a motion to approve the
With that
minutes?
correction, I'll second it.
Second.
All in favor of approving the August 5th minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, done.
And I abstain. I
Abstain.
abstain.
David wasn't here, so
Yeah,
abstain.
the two Davids.
Both Davids abstained. David,
Did you
okay.
get the people that are online? Did Scott and wrestling, they're online?
Is there any,
Did they vote? We've got 2 members online.
Yep, they should be able to.
do we have 2 members present on Zoom?
Yes.
Scott at wrestling? Have you voted?
I said aye. I approve.
Right,
Okay.
there we go.
Michelle, you got that? So the minutes have been approved. Okay, any new business? Hearing none, any old business? And the next meeting is September 13th. And the motion is in order to adjourn.
I will do 3 charters that night if you so desire.
Say again?
I'll do my 3 charters tonight, tomorrow, the 13th, if you so.
Right, 13th. Yep.
I move we adjourn this evening.
Second?
All in favor? Adjourned.
You did a great job. You really did. You always have house guests. You are a busy family.
We just got back from upstate New York. So
Great.
kayaking, biking, went to Auburn, visited William Seward's house and Harriet Tubman's
Oh,
house.
how fun. You guys have so much fun.